Colonel Marcus Green sits silently in the Pinewood County holding cell, his weathered hands folded calmly despite the blood trickling from his temple. Outside, 6 black military Escalades screech to a halt. A 4-star general steps out, his face set in cold fury. Release him. Now. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories of justice and dignity prevailing against all odds. Now, let's find out how a respected doctor and war hero ended up bleeding in a rural Mississippi jail cell, and why the highest levels of the military came to his rescue. Dr. Marcus Green adjusted his rearview mirror as he drove his modest 5-year-old Buick sedan down Highway 45 through Pinewood County, Mississippi. At 72, his posture remained military straight, a habit formed during 35 years of Army service. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rural road as he hummed along to jazz classics playing softly through the speakers. He was looking forward to seeing his son's family in Atlanta after delivering the keynote address at a neurosurgical conference in Memphis. Marcus had spent his career saving lives both on battlefields and in operating rooms, pioneering techniques that became standard practice in trauma medicine. His hands, though showing signs of age, had performed over 8,000 surgeries during his distinguished career. The peaceful drive was interrupted by flashing blue lights in his mirror. Marcus checked his speedometer, 63 in a 65 zone, but dutifully pulled onto the shoulder, placing both hands visibly on the steering wheel as his father had taught him decades ago. 2 Pinewood County Sheriff's deputies approached, one on either side of his vehicle. The taller officer, whose nameplate read, "Wilson," leaned down to the driver's window. "License and registration," he demanded without preamble. "Good afternoon, officer," Marcus replied politely, his voice carrying the measured tone developed during decades of high-pressure situations. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Officer Tanner Wilson's eyes narrowed. "I said license and registration." His partner, Officer Brett Lawson, circled the car, flashlight in hand despite the daylight, peering intently through each window. Marcus maintained his composure. "I understand, sir. I'm going to reach for my wallet now." He moved slowly, retrieving his license and registration from their proper places, and handed them to the officer. Wilson examined the documents with obvious skepticism. "You're a long way from home, aren't you?" he remarked, noting Marcus's Maryland address. "Just passing through on my way to visit family in Atlanta," Marcus explained calmly. "I was speaking at a medical conference in Memphis." Wilson's eyebrow raised. "A medical conference? What were you doing there, janitorial work?" The comment stung, but Marcus had heard worse throughout his life. "No, officer. I was the keynote speaker. I'm a neurosurgeon." This drew a derisive snort from Lawson, who had completed his inspection of the vehicle's exterior. "Yeah, right. And I'm the Surgeon General." Wilson handed the documents back with visible disdain. "You were speeding. 78 in a 65. Marcus knew this wasn't true but responded carefully. "I'm certain I wasn't speeding, officer. I always use cruise control set to the speed limit or slightly below." Wilson's face hardened. "Are you calling me a liar?" Before Marcus could respond, Lawson's attention was drawn to Marcus's wrist. "That's quite a watch for someone just passing through. Where'd you get that?" Marcus glanced at his Omega watch, a retirement gift from his colleagues at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. "It was a gift from my colleagues when I retired." Wilson exchanged a meaningful look with Lawson. "Step out of the car, sir." Marcus's military training told him something was very wrong, but he complied, moving slowly and deliberately. "May I ask why I'm being asked to exit my vehicle?" "We need to search your car," Wilson stated flatly. Marcus stood straight, his full 6 feet of height apparent despite his age. "Officer, I don't consent to a search. You don't have probable cause." This seemed to be exactly the response they were waiting for. Lawson stepped closer, hand resting on his holster. "What are you hiding?" "Drug runners use this route all the time." Marcus remained composed, though his heart rate increased. I'm not hiding anything. I'm simply exercising my Fourth Amendment rights. Wilson spotted something on the passenger seat, Marcus's conference badge with Dr. Marcus Green, M.D., Colonel, Ret., clearly printed beneath his photograph. He snatched it up. Impersonating a doctor, huh? That's a felony. Marcus felt a familiar weight in his chest, not physical, but the burden of battling prejudice his entire life. I am not impersonating anyone. I served as chief of neurosurgery at Walter Reed for 12 years before retiring. Wilson smirked. Sure you did. Hands behind your back. Marcus stood his ground. Officer, this is unnecessary. I've done nothing wrong. I'm a 72-year-old man driving to see my grandchildren. Lawson moved forward suddenly, grabbing Marcus's arm roughly. He said hands behind your back. The abrupt movement caused Marcus to flinch, which the officers immediately interpreted as resistance. Within seconds, both men had forced the elderly doctor against his car, wrenching his arms behind him with unnecessary force. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into his wrists, tightened well beyond what was needed. Please, Marcus said, wincing at the pain in his arthritic shoulders. I'm a veteran. I served this country for 35 years. Brett Lawson laughed openly. Yeah, right. You were probably just cleaning toilets. As they roughly patted him down, Marcus's wallet fell to the ground, and his military ID card slipped out. Officer Wilson noticed it, but rather than pick it up, he deliberately kicked it under the car with his boot. Oops, he said with a smirk. Looks like you dropped something. They led Marcus to the patrol car, reading him his rights as if performing a tiresome routine. You're under arrest for resisting arrest and possession of false identification. Marcus looked back at his car, containing his luggage, medical journals, and the presentation he delivered just that morning to a standing ovation from hundreds of colleagues. As they shoved him into the back seat, he caught a glimpse of the officers laughing together, pointing at his conference badge. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. This wasn't his first encounter with prejudice, but at 72, he had hoped those days were behind him. He straightened his back as much as the uncomfortable seat would allow, his dignity intact despite the circumstances. The patrol car pulled away, carrying him toward an escalating situation that would soon draw attention far beyond the borders of Pinewood County. The Pinewood County Sheriff's Department came into view after a 15-minute drive, a squat brick building with a flagpole and a row of patrol cars parked in front. To Marcus, who had seen government buildings around the world, it appeared unremarkable, yet as they pulled into the lot, he felt the weight of small-town power structures that often operated without proper oversight. The deputies roughly guided him inside, past the reception area where a dispatcher glanced up momentarily before returning to her computer. Got another one thinking he's somebody, Wilson announced to the room at large, drawing knowing chuckles from two other deputies lounging near a coffee machine. A processing officer looked up from her desk, younger than the others, with the nameplate, Jenkins, on her uniform. Officer Melissa Jenkins watched the scene with poorly concealed discomfort as Marcus was brought to her desk for booking. Name? She asked, avoiding eye contact. Dr. Marcus Green, he replied calmly, emphasizing his title. Wilson snorted behind him. Claims he's some big-shot doctor. Found him with fake credentials. Jenkins began typing, her fingers hesitating slightly. Date of birth? Marcus provided his information with military precision, maintaining his composure despite the handcuffs biting into his wrists. As Jenkins continued the booking process, the door to a private office opened, and Sheriff Dale Crandall emerged. Tall and imposing with a prominent belly straining against his uniform, Crandall carried himself with the authority of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. His campaign posters for state senate were visible on the office wall behind him. What's this about a doctor? He asked, eyes narrowing as they landed on Marcus. Wilson filled him in with embellishments, describing Marcus as belligerent and uncooperative. Crandall approached, looking Marcus up and down with undisguised contempt. Let's get one thing straight. I don't care who you pretend to be elsewhere, but in my county, that act won't fly. Marcus met his gaze evenly. Sheriff, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm a retired Army colonel and surgeon. If you'd allow me my phone call, this can be cleared up quickly. Crandall chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. You'll get your call when processing is complete. No rush. He turned to Jenkins. Finish booking him, then put him in holding cell 3. As the booking continued, Marcus remembered his first day at Johns Hopkins Medical School, 47 years earlier. One professor had pulled him aside. People will always question whether you belong here. Your work must be twice as good to be considered half as competent. That advice had shaped his career: meticulous preparation, impeccable results, no margin for error. Now, decades later, in this small-town sheriff's office, he was again reduced to proving his basic humanity. Marcus noticed a young black deputy watching the proceedings from across the room. The officer's nameplate read, Thompson, and he appeared troubled by what he was witnessing, though he remained silent. When Jenkins asked Marcus to empty his pockets, his personal effects were spread across her desk: keys, wallet, phone, and a small velvet box containing his military medals, which he always carried when traveling. Officer Lawson picked up the Distinguished Service Medal, turning it over carelessly. Nice props. Very realistic. Marcus felt his jaw tighten but said nothing. He had faced this before: the denial of his accomplishments, the assumption that his success must be fraudulent. Jenkins completed the paperwork and asked repeatedly about his phone call. Each time, Sheriff Crandall found a reason to delay. The phone system was updating, the proper forms weren't ready, they needed to verify his identity first. 2 hours after his arrival, Marcus still hadn't been permitted his constitutional right. A commotion erupted from a nearby holding area, shouts for help and the sound of something heavy falling. He's having a seizure or something, a voice called out. Deputies rushed toward the noise, finding a middle-aged detainee convulsing on the floor of a holding cell, foam at the corners of his mouth. Call an ambulance! Crandall ordered, but the deputy at the phone grimaced. Dispatch says at least 30 minutes. The county ambulance is on another call. The man's convulsions intensified, and a deputy called out, I think it's a stroke. His face is drooping on one side. The panic in the room was palpable as the man's condition deteriorated rapidly. Marcus stepped forward, his handcuffs still on. I can help. I'm a neurologist. Sheriff Crandall blocked his path. Stay back. We don't need your help. The man on the floor stopped convulsing and became ominously still. A deputy checked his pulse and looked up with alarm. It's weak and irregular. Marcus drew himself up to his full height and spoke in what his military colleagues had called his combat surgeon voice, authoritative and commanding. That man has approximately 4 minutes before brain damage becomes permanent. I've treated thousands of stroke patients. Remove these cuffs and let me help him, or you can explain to his family why you let him die when a qualified doctor was standing right here. The urgency in his voice and the dire prognosis created a moment of indecision for Crandall, who finally nodded curtly. Uncuff him. But watch him closely. With his hands freed, Marcus moved swiftly to the man's side, checking vital signs with practiced efficiency. I need a pen light, an aspirin, and something to elevate his head. The deputies scrambled to comply, suddenly following his orders without question. Marcus worked methodically, assessing the patient and stabilizing him with the limited resources available. His hands moved with confidence born from decades of emergency medicine. This is an ischemic stroke. His airway is stable, but he needs TPA treatment immediately. When is that ambulance arriving? He asked, maintaining pressure on specific points to improve blood flow. The deputies watched in stunned silence as Marcus transformed before their eyes from a suspected criminal to a commanding medical professional. When the ambulance finally arrived, Marcus briefed the paramedics with such precision and medical terminology that they automatically deferred to him, asking for his treatment recommendations. Only when the patient was safely loaded into the ambulance did Sheriff Crandall reassert control. That's enough playing doctor. Back to the cell. Despite having just potentially saved a man's life, Marcus was re-handcuffed and led back to holding cell 3. The sheriff, clearly embarrassed by how the situation had unfolded, barked at his deputies. I'll deal with him later. No phone call until I say so. As Marcus was locked in the cell, he noticed Deputy Thompson lingering nearby, ostensibly checking something on a clipboard. When the other officers dispersed, Thompson approached the cell, speaking in a low voice. What they're doing isn't right. I can help. Before Marcus could respond, Thompson slipped something through the bars, a small cell phone, hidden from the security cameras by his body. Make it quick. I'll be back in 5 minutes to retrieve it. Marcus took the phone with steady hands, nodding his thanks. As soon as Thompson walked away, he dialed a number he knew by heart, one he hadn't used in emergency capacity for years. When the call connected, he spoke just 3 words, a coded message established long ago. Hippocrates needs Athena. Then he ended the call, erased the history, and waited for Deputy Thompson to return, knowing that wheels were now in motion that would forever change Pinewood County. Colonel Victoria Daniels was reviewing deployment strategies in her Pentagon office when her secure phone line rang. The 3 words she heard, Hippocrates needs Athena, made her blood run cold. It was a distress code she hadn't heard in 15 years, one reserved for life-threatening situations involving Dr. Marcus Green, her former commanding officer and mentor. She immediately ended the call and activated emergency protocols, her mind racing with possibilities. What could have happened to Marcus, a 72-year-old retired surgeon, that would prompt him to use their old emergency code? Victoria's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up Marcus's location data from his smartwatch, a security measure implemented for high-ranking officials even after retirement. The GPS coordinates placed him in Pinewood County, Mississippi, significantly off his planned route from Memphis to Atlanta. Without hesitation, she picked up her secure line to General Robert Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and another life deeply intertwined with Marcus's. General, we have a Hippocrates situation in Mississippi. Those words were enough. General Hayes, who owed his son's life to Marcus after a complex battlefield surgery in Afghanistan, responded immediately. Activate the response team. I'll meet you in the Situation Room in 5. Within minutes, the Pentagon's crisis room hummed with activity. Satellite imagery zeroed in on Pinewood County. Military intelligence officers cross-referenced Marcus's scheduled movements with his current location, and Victoria assembled a dossier on local law enforcement. Marcus was scheduled to deliver a keynote at Memphis General yesterday, then drive to Atlanta to visit his son's family. She briefed the assembled team. His last checkpoint was a gas station just outside Memphis at 1,300 hours. He should have been near Birmingham by now. A young intelligence officer raised her hand. Colonel, we've found something on Sheriff Dale Crandall of Pinewood County. There are 17 discrimination complaints filed against his department in the last 3 years, for involving traffic stops of black motorists on the same stretch of highway where Dr. Green's signal is located. General Hayes's expression darkened. Get me the governor of Mississippi. The call was placed on speakerphone, and after identifying himself, Hayes explained the situation concisely. The governor's response was dismissive. With all due respect, General, this sounds like a local matter. I'm sure if there's been some misunderstanding, Sheriff Crandall is handling it appropriately. Governor, Hayes replied, his voice carrying the weight of his 4 stars. Dr. Marcus Green is not just any citizen. He's saved more American soldiers' lives than anyone in the last 50 years. He personally operated on 3 sitting cabinet members and developed the trauma protocols used by every combat medic in our armed forces. If he's being detained without cause, I consider it a matter of national security. The governor remained unmoved. I understand your concern, but we have procedures. I'll have someone look into it tomorrow. After the call ended, Hayes turned to the room. Tomorrow isn't good enough. Colonel Daniels, assemble a team. We're going to Pinewood County. Victoria nodded, already selecting personnel. I want every soldier in that convoy to have a personal connection to Dr. Green. Every driver, every security officer should know exactly who they're retrieving. As Victoria organized the logistics, satellite technicians reported a concerning development. Colonel, we're monitoring Dr. Green's vitals through his smartwatch. His heart rate is showing irregularities consistent with his documented cardiac condition. Medical records indicate he takes daily medication for arrhythmia. Victoria's concern deepened. If they've taken his personal effects, he won't have access to his medication. She turned to the communications officer. Any response from local FBI? They're sending agents from the Jackson Field office, but estimated arrival is 90 minutes. Hayes made the final decision. We're not waiting. Colonel Daniels, your team deploys in 15 minutes. I'm coming with you. As the response team prepared for departure, the intelligence officers continued building their case. Sheriff Crandall is running for state senate next year. One reported. His campaign is heavily funded by private prison interests. His department has one of the highest arrest rates for minor offenses in the state, particularly for black motorists passing through the county. 6 black Escalades were prepared, equipped with secure communications and medical equipment. The team included combat medics familiar with Marcus's condition and military police officers with federal jurisdiction documentation. Before departing, Hayes made one more call to the Secretary of Defense, informing him of the situation and receiving full authorization for the operation. Back in Pinewood County, Marcus sat in his cell, the effects of missing his heart medication beginning to show. His normally steady hands had a slight tremor, and occasional palpitations disrupted his measured breathing. Deputy Thompson had returned for the phone, whispering, "Help is coming," before disappearing back into the station's operations. Sheriff Crandall received a call that visibly disturbed him, his face flushing as he barked into the phone. "The FBI has no jurisdiction here. This is my county." After slamming the phone down, he gathered his senior deputies, pointedly excluding Thompson. "Listen up. We may have some federal types showing up asking questions about our doctor impersonator. Nobody says anything without my approval, understood? Have you ever witnessed someone abuse their authority like Sheriff Crandall? Comment 1. If you believe there should be stricter oversight of rural law enforcement, and don't forget to hit that like button to support stories that expose injustice." The military convoy was now speeding toward Pinewood County, cutting through the Mississippi night with determined purpose. General Hayes sat in the lead vehicle, reviewing Marcus's file, the hundreds of combat surgeries, the medical innovations, the lives saved across 5 decades of service. Marcus Green wasn't just a colleague, he was a national treasure whose value couldn't be measured. The question hanging in the air as they crossed county lines was simple but profound. How could a man who had given so much to his country be treated with such contempt by those sworn to uphold its laws? Would the military arrive in time to prevent a medical emergency, or would they find their worst fears realized? Let's continue this incredible story and find out what happens when worlds collide at the Pinewood County Sheriff's Department. In his holding cell, Marcus Green pressed a hand against his chest, feeling the irregular rhythm that signaled his medication was well past due. The arrhythmia wasn't immediately dangerous, but without treatment, it could progress to something more serious. He regulated his breathing, using meditation techniques he'd learned during his tours in Vietnam. Focus on what you can control, he reminded himself, a mantra that had served him through combat zones and operating rooms alike. The sheriff's department had settled into evening routines, with the night shift taking over from day deputies. Marcus observed them all with the careful attention of someone accustomed to assessing environments for threats and opportunities. Deputy Sandra Collins, a 30-something officer with auburn hair pulled into a tight bun, had arrived for the night shift and immediately sensed something unusual in the atmosphere. After checking the logbook, she stepped into the break room where Deputy James Thompson was pouring coffee. "What's the story with the older gentleman in cell 3? She asked quietly. Thompson glanced around before responding. "They brought him in for allegedly impersonating a doctor and resisting arrest, but Sandra, something's not right." This guy knew exactly what he was doing when Martinez had that stroke. Saved his life using just what we had in the first aid kit. Sandra's brow furrowed. Has anyone run his information through the database? Thompson shook his head. Sheriff told Melissa not to bother, said it was all fake anyway. While the other deputies were occupied with shift change, Sandra returned to her computer and entered Marcus's information into the National Law Enforcement Database. Her eyes widened as results populated her screen: military service records, medical credentials, security clearances, and a biography that read like fiction but was thoroughly documented. Dr. Marcus Green wasn't just a doctor, he was a legend in military medicine. The system flagged him as a VIP with Pentagon connections, noting his Presidential Medal of Freedom and numerous other decorations. Sandra printed the file and walked directly to Sheriff Crandall's office, knocking firmly despite her junior status. "What is it, Collins?" he barked, looking up from campaign materials spread across his desk. "Sir, I've run a background check on the prisoner in cell 3, she said, placing the printout before him. "He is who he says he is. Dr. Marcus Green is a highly decorated veteran and surgeon. He has active security clearances and direct Pentagon connections." Crandall scanned the documents, his expression darkening. "I didn't authorize this search." He crumpled the papers and tossed them into his trash can. "Collins, this doesn't change anything. These people come through with fake credentials all the time. For all we know, he hacked the database." Sandra stood her ground. "Sir, with respect, his identity has been confirmed by multiple systems. He needs his medication, and he's entitled to his phone call. If something happens to him in our custody..." Crandall cut her off. "Are you telling me how to do my job, Deputy?" His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Let me be clear. This department has procedures. I determine when they're followed and when exceptions are made. If you have a problem with that, your resignation would be accepted immediately." He leaned forward. "Besides, Wilson found something interesting during the vehicle search, a prescription bottle that looks suspiciously like OxyContin. Maybe our doctor has a side business." Sandra was stunned. "Sir, they didn't have a warrant for that search." Crandall smiled coldly. "Probable cause, Collins. He was acting erratically, and Officer Wilson feared for his safety. The implication was clear: they were planning to plant evidence." Sandra left the office, her mind racing. Her father had been wounded in Desert Storm and often spoke of the army doctor who had saved his leg when others wanted to amputate. She couldn't help wondering if her father's doctor and the man in cell 3 had crossed paths, or might even be the same person. Meanwhile, the military convoy crossed into Pinewood County, maintaining secure communications with the Pentagon. 15 minutes to target. The driver informed General Hayes, who nodded grimly. Victoria Daniels coordinated with advance teams and monitored the FBI's progress from their field office. "General, local media has picked up chatter about military vehicles in the area. A reporter is already outside the sheriff's department." Hayes considered this development. "Good. Witnesses might help keep this situation from escalating." In Washington, news of the operation had reached higher levels. The Secretary of Defense briefed the President, who authorized full federal resources to resolve the situation. "Marcus Green saved my brother at Landstuhl Medical Center in 2003. The President told his Chief of Staff. Whatever he needs, he gets." Back at the Sheriff's Department, Marcus's condition was deteriorating. The chest pains had intensified, and cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He had tried requesting his medication 3 times, each request met with indifference or outright mockery. "Should have thought about that before you decided to play doctor," one deputy had sneered. Marcus closed his eyes, conserving energy, when he heard footsteps approaching. Deputy Sandra Collins appeared at his cell, quickly glancing over her shoulder before unlocking the door. "Dr. Green," she whispered, "I know who you are. Take these." She pressed 2 small pills into his hand. "It's your heart medication. I found it in your personal effects." Marcus looked at her with gratitude. Thank you, Deputy Collins. She nodded, locking the cell again. My father was a Master Sergeant, 7th Infantry Division. Desert Storm. A black surgeon saved his leg when everyone else wanted to amputate. He still talks about that, Doctor. Marcus smiled faintly. That was a long time ago. Many good doctors served in that conflict. Sandra started to respond when Sheriff Crandall's voice boomed from the main office. Collins! Get in here! She hurried away, leaving Marcus to take his medication discreetly. In the office, Crandall was on the phone, his face flushed with anger. Military police? On what authority? He listened briefly before exploding. This is my jurisdiction. You can't just roll in here with federal agents. He slammed the phone down and turned to the assembled deputies. We've got a situation. Some military types claiming to be from the Pentagon are en route, saying our prisoner is some kind of VIP. He pointed at Wilson and Lawson. You two, get that evidence processing paperwork ready. Make sure everything is by the book. He turned to another deputy. Secure all entrances. Nobody gets in without my direct authorization. Outside, the first news van had arrived, setting up across from the sheriff's department. The reporter, a young woman from the Jackson affiliate, began her live broadcast. We're outside the Pinewood County Sheriff's Department, where sources tell us a military convoy is en route following the alleged wrongful arrest of a prominent individual. Details are still emerging, but witnesses report seeing multiple government vehicles heading this direction. Sheriff Crandall watched the broadcast on the office television, his expression hardening with each word. He picked up his phone and dialed the governor's office. Governor Dale Crandall. We've got a situation brewing that could affect your administration. I need your support right now. As he spoke, Deputy Thompson quietly disabled the building's backup generator, a small act of sabotage that would prove significant if the confrontation escalated. Sandra returned to her desk, where she had been researching Dr. Green more thoroughly. The screen displayed a photograph of him receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom, standing alongside 3 former presidents. Another image showed him performing surgery in a combat zone, his steady hands saving a young soldier with catastrophic injuries. A third photograph made her gasp, Marcus Green standing next to her father in a military hospital, both men much younger but unmistakable. She printed this image and folded it carefully into her pocket. Outside, the distant sound of multiple engines approached, growing louder with each passing second. Sheriff Crandall ended his call with the governor, looking less confident than before. Everyone to your positions, he ordered. Remember, this is our jurisdiction. Stand your ground. As the convoy of black Escalades approached their final turn toward the sheriff's department, Marcus Green felt his medication beginning to take effect, his heartbeat steadying. He sat up straighter on the metal bench, adjusting his rumpled clothes as best he could. Decades of military discipline had taught him to prepare for all scenarios, including the one now unfolding, when systems of power collide, and authority is challenged by greater authority. The small-town fiefdom of Sheriff Dale Crandall was about to meet the full weight of federal power, backed by the highest levels of military command. The question wasn't just about one man's freedom, but about accountability in a system that too often operated without it. The low rumble of powerful engines announced the arrival of the military convoy before the vehicles themselves came into view. 6 black Escalades with government plates pulled into the sheriff's department parking lot in perfect formation, surrounding the building's main entrance. Floodlights mounted on the vehicles illuminated the area with stark clarity, casting dramatic shadows across the brick facade. Inside, deputies scrambled to position themselves as Sheriff Crandall barked orders. Wilson, Lawson, guard the prisoner. Martinez, Rodriguez, main entrance. Everyone else secure the perimeter. Nobody gets in without my direct authorization. Deputies exchanged nervous glances, the gravity of the situation becoming clear. Through the windows, they could see military personnel in full uniform deploying from the vehicles with practiced efficiency. They can't just storm in here, Crandall declared, though his voice carried less conviction than before. This is county property under my jurisdiction. Deputy Sandra Collins watched the scene unfold with mounting tension. Sir, perhaps we should verify their credentials and— I don't need suggestions, Collins, Crandall snapped. I need people following orders. Outside, General Robert Hayes emerged from the lead vehicle, his four-star insignia visible even from a distance. Flanked by Colonel Victoria Daniels and 4 military police officers, he approached the main entrance with purposeful strides. Behind them, a medical team stood ready beside one of the escalades, equipment prepared for immediate deployment. At the entrance, Deputies Martinez and Rodriguez stood with hands nervously resting on their holsters. This facility is locked down by order of Sheriff Crandall, Martinez announced, his voice betraying his unease at confronting senior military officers. General Hayes regarded him calmly. I'm General Robert Hayes, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We're here for Dr. Marcus Green, who is being illegally detained in your facility. He presented official documentation bearing Presidential and Department of Defense seals. These are federal orders for his immediate release into our custody. Martinez examined the papers uncertainly, clearly out of his depth. I need to show these to the sheriff. Of course, Hayes replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Please inform Sheriff Crandall that I expect to speak with him immediately. As Martinez retreated inside with the documents, Colonel Daniels surveyed the growing crowd. Local residents had begun gathering across the street, drawn by the commotion and the news van's presence. The reporter was broadcasting live, her camera capturing the military presence and the clearly identified general waiting at the sheriff's department door. Victoria spoke quietly into her communication device. Perimeter secure. Media presence confirmed. FBI ETA 12 minutes. Inside, Sheriff Crandall reviewed the federal orders with growing alarm. Despite his bluster, he recognized the signatures and seals represented authority far beyond his own. He grabbed his phone and dialed the governor again. Governor, they're here with federal papers. I need your intervention now. The governor's response was markedly different from their earlier conversation. Dale, I've received calls from the Secretary of Defense and the Attorney General in the last 20 minutes. Whatever you've done, you're on your own. I recommend compliance. Crandall slammed the phone down, his face flushing deep red. Outside, General Hayes had grown tired of waiting. He retrieved a bullhorn from one of the vehicles and addressed the building directly. Sheriff Crandall, this is General Robert Hayes. We have federal orders for the immediate release of Dr. Marcus Green. He requires urgent medical attention for a heart condition. We are prepared to enter the facility if necessary. The bullhorn carried his voice clearly to the growing crowd and the news cameras. Inside his cell, Marcus heard the general's voice and allowed himself a small smile. He had first met Hayes in 1971, when both were young men serving in Vietnam. Marcus, already a skilled surgeon despite his youth, had performed an emergency procedure on Hayes's best friend after a helicopter crash, saving the man's life when other doctors had declared the case hopeless. Their paths had crossed many times in the decades since, including when Marcus performed brain surgery on Hayes's son following an IED explosion in Afghanistan. Now, 54 years after their first meeting, Hayes had come in person to ensure Marcus's safety. Meanwhile, Colonel Daniels coordinated the arrival of additional forces. 2 FBI vehicles pulled into the parking lot, agents emerging to confer with the military personnel. An ambulance arrived as well, positioning itself for quick access. The show of federal force was overwhelming for the small county facility. Inside, deputies began questioning Sheriff Crandall's approach. Sir, ventured Deputy Thompson. With respect, this situation is escalating beyond our control. Perhaps we should comply with the federal orders. Crandall rounded on him furiously. Are you suggesting I surrender my authority in my own jurisdiction? Before Thompson could respond, Sandra Collins stepped forward. Sheriff, Dr. Green needs medical attention. His heart condition is documented. If something happens to him in our custody with medical personnel standing outside ready to help, the liability would be enormous. Other deputies nodded in agreement, their resolve visibly weakening. Crandall sensed his control slipping away. Nobody does anything without my direct order," he insisted, moving toward the cells. "I want to speak to this doctor myself." In cell 3, Marcus sat calmly despite the commotion. Years of operating under pressure had taught him to maintain composure in chaos. When Sheriff Crandall appeared at his cell door, Marcus simply looked up, saying nothing. "Your friends are making quite a scene," Crandall said, attempting to maintain an air of authority. "Quite a production for someone caught with false identification and contraband." Marcus regarded him steadily. "We both know those charges are fabricated, Sheriff. The only question now is how this ends for you." Before Crandall could respond, Deputy Thompson approached urgently. "Sheriff, the FBI special agent in charge is requesting to speak with you. He says it's regarding potential civil rights violations." Crandall's face contorted with rage. "This is my department. My county." Outside, the situation continued to develop. The media presence had doubled, with another news van arriving. The crowd of onlookers had grown substantially, many filming with their phones. General Hayes consulted with FBI officials, who were preparing to execute a federal warrant. Colonel Daniels received an update from Washington. "The Attorney General has personally authorized breach of the facility if Dr. Green is not released within the next 10 minutes. Victoria relayed this information to Hayes, who nodded grimly. Inside, Deputies Wilson and Lawson approached Sheriff Crandall with evident concern. "Sir," Wilson said quietly, "my cruiser dashcam was running during the traffic stop. If they review that footage..." The implication hung in the air. Evidence of their misconduct was recorded. Crandall's expression darkened further. "Disable the system. Claim a technical malfunction." Wilson hesitated. "Sir, tampering with evidence. That's an order, Deputy," Crandall hissed. Deputy Thompson, overhearing this exchange, slipped away toward the evidence room, where the digital recordings were stored. Meanwhile, Sandra Collins had made a decision. She approached the cell area where Marcus was being held. "Dr. Green," she said softly, "I need to speak with you about my father." Marcus looked up with interest as she showed him the photograph she'd printed, himself with her father in a field hospital decades earlier. "Master Sergeant Collins," Marcus recalled, his memory impressive despite the years. "Shrapnel wounds to the right leg. The orthopedic surgeon wanted to amputate, but I saw a way to save it." Sandra's eyes widened. "You remember him? After all these years and thousands of patients?" Marcus nodded. "I remember all of them, especially the difficult cases. Your father's determination was remarkable. He followed every instruction perfectly during rehabilitation." Their conversation was interrupted by General Hayes's voice on the bullhorn again. "Sheriff Crandall, you have 5 minutes to release Dr. Green before we execute our federal warrant to enter the facility." The sheriff stormed back to the main office, where FBI agents could now be seen positioning themselves alongside military personnel outside the main entrance. The building's phone rang insistently, calls from the state attorney general, the Department of Justice, and news organizations piling up unanswered. Crandall grabbed his service weapon and checked the magazine. If they want to come in, they'll have to do it by force. Several deputies exchanged alarmed looks at this declaration. Deputy Martinez removed his hand from his holster in a deliberate gesture. "Sir, I didn't sign up for a standoff with the U.S. military and FBI." One by one, other deputies made similar choices, stepping back from what was clearly becoming a dangerous situation. Crandall looked around, seeing his authority evaporating before his eyes. In a desperate move, he strode to the front entrance and flung open the door, pointing his weapon at the federal agents assembled outside. "This is my jurisdiction," he shouted, his voice cracking with rage and fear. Cameras captured the moment, a county sheriff pointing a gun at a 4-star general and FBI agents, a moment of madness that would soon be broadcast across the nation. General Hayes remained perfectly calm, hands visible at his sides. "Sheriff Crandall," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of command, "I suggest you lower your weapon before you add assaulting federal officers to your growing list of charges." The standoff at the entrance to the Pinewood County Sheriff's Department had reached a critical point. Sheriff Crandall stood with his weapon drawn, facing down federal agents and military personnel while news helicopters circled overhead, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Inside the building, the remaining deputies watched in horrified silence, the reality of their situation becoming inescapably clear. This was no longer about jurisdiction or authority. It was about right and wrong, law and abuse, and the consequences of unchecked power. While all attention focused on the confrontation at the entrance, Deputy James Thompson moved with quiet purpose through the department's evidence room. With quick, practiced movements, he downloaded the dash camera footage from Wilson and Lawson's patrol car onto a secure flash drive. The video clearly showed the entire traffic stop, Dr. Green's polite compliance, the officers' escalating aggression, the fabricated charges, and the excessive force used against an elderly man who had offered no resistance. Thompson stepped into an empty office and sent the footage directly to Colonel Daniels' secure email, which she had provided during their brief phone communication earlier. Footage secured and transmitted. He texted from a burner phone. Cell block security cameras also show denial of medical care and civil rights violations. At the Pentagon Command Center, the incoming files were immediately analyzed and verified. Within minutes, the authenticated footage was transmitted back to the scene, where Colonel Daniels received it on a secure tablet. After a quick review, she approached General Hayes, showing him the damning evidence. Hayes nodded grimly and gestured to the technical specialist in their team, who accessed the Sheriff Department's emergency broadcast system, a channel designed for crisis communications that reached every radio, computer, and television in the building. Broadcasting evidence on internal channels in 30 seconds, the specialist confirmed. Inside the department, every screen suddenly flickered, then displayed the dash camera footage of Dr. Green's arrest. Deputies stopped in their tracks, watching in stunned silence as the evidence of misconduct played out before them. The footage was unambiguous. There had been no speeding, no resistance, no justification for the arrest. The audio captured the racial slurs and derogatory comments, the deliberate ignorance of Marcus's credentials, and the moment when Officer Wilson kicked his military ID under the car. As the video continued, a second window opened on the screens displaying Marcus's distinguished service record, medical achievements, and honors. The juxtaposition was stark, a decorated hero being mistreated by the very people sworn to uphold the law. Sheriff Crandall, still at the entrance with his weapon drawn, remained unaware of what was happening inside. Deputy Sandra Collins approached him from behind, her own hand now resting on her holster. "Sheriff, you need to see what's playing on every screen inside." When Crandall refused to acknowledge her, she continued, "The dash cam footage shows everything. Everyone can see what really happened. It's over." From their positions throughout the building, other deputies began laying down their weapons, making the decision to step away from a system they could no longer defend. Outside, the FBI special agent in charge stepped forward beside General Hayes. "Sheriff Crandall, I am placing you under arrest for civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and assaulting federal officers. Lower your weapon immediately." In cell 3, Marcus suddenly clutched his chest, a sharp pain cutting through him despite the medication Deputy Collins had provided. The stress of the situation had exacerbated his condition beyond what the limited dosage could manage. He called out weakly, "I need help." Sandra, hearing his call, rushed to the cell block. "Dr. Green!" She found him collapsed on the bench, his breathing labored and skin ashen. Without hesitation, she radioed, "Medical emergency in cell 3. The prisoner needs immediate assistance." Her call was heard by both department personnel and the military medical team waiting outside. As Sheriff Crandall continued his standoff at the entrance, several deputies made a decision. Led by Thompson and Collins, they opened the rear entrance to allow the military medical team access to Marcus. Dr. Aisha Johnson, a combat surgeon who had trained under Marcus years earlier, rushed in with her team, medical equipment in hand. When they reached cell 3, Dr. Johnson immediately recognized her mentor. "Colonel Green," she gasped, quickly assessing his condition. "Acute arrhythmia exacerbated by stress and medication interruption. We need to stabilize him before transport." While the medical team worked, the footage of Marcus's arrest continued playing throughout the building. It was followed by documentation of Sheriff Crandall's history, 17 formal complaints of racial discrimination, suspicious patterns in asset seizures from minority motorists, and internal memos suggesting quotas for arrests in certain demographic groups. This evidence had been compiled not just by Deputy Thompson but by FBI agents who had been investigating the department for months. Outside, the crowd of onlookers had grown substantially, many holding up phones to record the historic confrontation. Local residents who had experienced similar treatment from the department watched with a complex mixture of emotions: vindication, anger, hope that change might finally come to Pinewood County. The news helicopters captured the moment when FBI agents finally moved in to disarm Sheriff Crandall, who, realizing he was completely isolated, finally lowered his weapon and surrendered. As he was led away in handcuffs, the cameras recorded his expression of stunned disbelief. A man who had never imagined being held accountable suddenly facing the full weight of justice. Inside, the medical team stabilized Marcus enough for transport. As they prepared to move him, he looked up at Dr. Johnson with recognition. "Aisha, you finally got those steady hands I always told you about." She smiled through unshed tears. "Learn from the best, Colonel." As they wheeled him through the department, deputies lined the hallway, many standing at attention in a show of respect that came too late, but acknowledged the grave injustice that had occurred. Outside, General Hayes personally supervised Marcus's transfer to the waiting medical transport. "We've got you, old friend," he said, gripping Marcus's hand firmly. "Just like Keysan in 72. Marcus managed a weak smile. "Took you long enough, Robert. Getting slow in your old age." The attempt at humor reassured Hayes more than any medical report could have. While Marcus was being loaded into the ambulance, Colonel Daniels coordinated with FBI agents who were now securing the building and collecting evidence. Deputies Wilson and Lawson were placed under arrest for their roles in the false arrest and evidence tampering. Deputy Thompson provided additional files documenting a pattern of similar incidents spanning years, evidence he had been carefully collecting while working within a system he hoped to change. Local residents began approaching the FBI agents, offering their own testimonies of encounters with the department. One elderly woman tearfully described how her grandson had been arrested on fabricated charges that derailed his college scholarship. A middle-aged man recounted losing his business after a baseless asset seizure. A young mother explained how she took detours, adding 30 minutes to her commute just to avoid driving through the county. Their stories painted a picture of systemic abuse that had gone unchecked for years. What do you think about the power of video evidence in exposing police misconduct? Comment 1. If you believe body cameras should be mandatory for all law enforcement, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more stories about accountability and justice. As Marcus was transported to the nearest military medical facility, accompanied by Dr. Johnson and a full trauma team, the scene at the sheriff's department continued to unfold. FBI agents discovered documents in Sheriff Crandall's office revealing a pattern of targeting out-of-state vehicles with expensive cars or professional license plates, a systematic approach to generating revenue through questionable seizures and citations. They also found campaign materials connecting Crandall to private prison companies that benefited from the county's high arrest rates. The evidence suggested corruption far beyond racial bias, touching state officials and business interests that had profited from the department's actions for years. The question now facing everyone involved was how deep the investigation would go, and how many others would be implicated in a system that had failed not just Marcus Green, but countless citizens who lacked his connections and resources. Would this incident lead to meaningful change, or would it be treated as an isolated case rather than a symptom of broader problems? As night fell on Pinewood County, this question hung in the air, unanswered but unavoidable. The military medical facility in Meridian, Mississippi hummed with efficient activity as Dr. Marcus Green was wheeled into the cardiac care unit. The team led by Dr. Aisha Johnson had stabilized his condition during transport, but the 24 hours of stress, physical mistreatment, and interrupted medication had taken their toll on his 72-year-old heart. BP 140/90, heart rate irregular but responding to treatment, Dr. Johnson reported as they transferred him to the hospital bed. Let's get a complete cardiac workup and monitor for any signs of damage. Despite his condition, Marcus remained alert and dignified. I appreciate the concern, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in the cell. But I believe I'll recover more quickly if someone could provide me with a proper shirt and perhaps some news about what's happening in Pinewood County. General Hayes, who had accompanied the medical transport, stepped forward with a small duffel bag. Got your go bag from your car, Marcus. And as for news, well, let's just say the FBI is having a very productive evening. While Marcus changed into his own clothes and underwent further medical evaluation, the scene at the Pinewood County Sheriff's Department had transformed into something resembling a federal operations center. FBI agents from the Civil Rights Division had taken control of the building, securing evidence and conducting interviews with deputies and local citizens alike. The department's computer systems were being systematically examined by forensic specialists who had uncovered a trove of incriminating documents. Special Agent Taryn Washington, leading the FBI investigation, established a temporary public intake center in the town library where residents could provide statements about their experiences with the department. The response was overwhelming. Citizens who had never felt safe reporting abuses now formed a line stretching around the block. Deputy James Thompson sat across from Agent Washington, sliding an external hard drive across the table. I've been documenting irregularities for 18 months, he explained. Traffic stop data showing racial disparities, asset forfeiture patterns, bogus arrests that never result in charges but generate booking fees for the county. It's all here, organized by date and officer involved. Agent Washington regarded him with professional interest. Why didn't you report this through official channels? Thompson's expression was grim. I filed 3 reports with state authorities. Each time, the complaints mysteriously disappeared, and each time, I was assigned to night shifts for the next 6 months. After the 3rd attempt, I realized someone at the state level was protecting Crandall, so I started building my own case. In another room, Deputy Sandra Collins provided her own testimony, including the revelation about her father's connection to Dr. Green. When I saw that photograph of them together, I knew we had made a terrible mistake. My father always said a black surgeon saved his leg when everyone else wanted to amputate. He said that doctor fought for him when no one else would. Agent Washington nodded. Dr. Green has apparently been fighting for people his entire life. The interrogation of Sheriff Dale Crandall was conducted by senior FBI officials in the presence of federal prosecutors. Faced with overwhelming evidence and abandoned by his political connections, Crandall's arrogance finally crumbled. You don't understand how things work in counties like this, he protested weakly. We have quotas to meet, budgets to maintain. The system requires revenue. The system doesn't require constitutional violations, the prosecutor responded coldly. It doesn't require targeting citizens based on race. It doesn't require fabricating evidence or denying medical care to detainees. As the interrogation continued, Officers Wilson and Lawson were processed in separate rooms, each attempting to minimize their involvement by implicating the other and their superior officers. Their contradicting statements only strengthened the case against the entire department. By morning, the story had erupted into national news. Major networks broadcast the dash camera footage, showing Marcus's dignified composure in the face of blatant discrimination and abuse of power. His remarkable life story became the subject of special reports, from his childhood in segregated Baltimore, where he studied by candlelight because his neighborhood experienced frequent power outages, to his scholarship at Johns Hopkins Medical School, where he graduated first in his class despite open hostility from some faculty and students. Reports detailed his military service across 3 combat zones, the surgical techniques he pioneered that became standard practice worldwide, and the generations of doctors he had trained who now held leading positions in hospitals across the country. In a particularly moving segment, a reporter interviewed 3 veterans whose lives Marcus had saved through innovative procedures when conventional approaches would have failed. "He didn't see color or rank," said one former Marine with prosthetic limbs. "He just saw a life that could be saved if he was willing to try what others wouldn't." Back at the military medical facility, Marcus was visited by Pentagon officials, including the Secretary of Defense, who personally apologized for his treatment. "Dr. Green, on behalf of the administration and a grateful nation, I want to express our profound regret for what you experienced." Marcus received the apology with characteristic grace. "Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your concern, but I'm more interested in what happens next. Will this incident be treated as an isolated case of a few bad actors, or will it prompt a serious examination of systemic problems?" The Secretary nodded gravely. "The President has directed a comprehensive review of law enforcement practices in counties with patterns of civil rights complaints. Your experience, while deeply regrettable, may serve as a catalyst for meaningful change." Later that afternoon, a secure call was patched through from the White House. "Dr. Green," came the President's voice. "I wish we were speaking under better circumstances." "As do I, Mr. President," Marcus replied. "I believe we last met at the Medal of Freedom ceremony." "We did indeed. I've directed the Attorney General to personally oversee this investigation, and to use every resource available to ensure justice is served, not just in your case, but for the community affected by these abuses." While Marcus fielded calls from officials and colleagues, the investigation in Pinewood County continued to expand. FBI agents discovered connections between Sheriff Crandall's department and a network of private probation companies and detention facilities that profited from the county's aggressive policing. The corrupt system extended to judges who imposed excessive fines and probation terms, creating a modern debtor's prison that disproportionately affected minority residents and travelers. Officers Wilson and Lawson were brought to the medical facility under federal guard to face Marcus in person. The meeting, requested by Marcus himself, was brief but powerful. The officers, now stripped of their badges and facing serious charges, could barely meet his gaze. "I want you to know that I forgive you," Marcus told them, his voice steady. "But forgiveness doesn't replace accountability, and it doesn't excuse the harm you've caused to countless others without my resources and connections. I hope you use this experience to examine the beliefs that led you to treat a fellow human being as you treated me." Wilson, the more senior officer, finally looked up. "How can you forgive us after what we did?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Because holding on to anger would only continue to give you power over my peace of mind. And because I've seen enough hatred in my lifetime to know it solves nothing." As the officers were led away, Dr. Johnson checked Marcus's vital signs again. "Your heart rate is completely normal now," she reported with evident relief. "Whatever they say about forgiveness being good for the heart appears to be medically sound." Marcus smiled. "Aisha, after 40 years of practicing medicine, I've found that the connections between our physical and emotional states are far more profound than most textbooks acknowledge." By evening, Marcus was deemed stable enough to travel, and arrangements were made to transport him to his son's home in Atlanta to complete his recovery. Before leaving, he met with Deputy Thompson and Deputy Collins, who had risked their careers to help him. "What you did took tremendous courage," he told them. "Standing up against a corrupt system from within requires a special kind of strength." Thompson shook his head. "We didn't do enough, sir. We should have acted sooner." "Change rarely happens all at once," Marcus replied. "It comes through persistent effort and the willingness to take risks when opportunities arise. You both did that, and Pinewood County will be better for it." As Marcus prepared to depart, the hospital hallway filled with military personnel standing at attention, doctors, nurses, and soldiers who had come to pay their respects to a man whose contributions to medicine and military service had touched countless lives. General Hayes accompanied him to the waiting transport, 2 old soldiers who had seen the world change and had worked in their own ways to change it for the better. "This isn't over, Marcus," Hayes said quietly. What happened to you has opened a door that can't be closed again." Marcus nodded, looking back at the facility where his health had been restored and where a new chapter in a much larger story was beginning. "It never is over, Robert. That's the nature of progress. It's never complete, never perfect, but always worth fighting for." 1 week after the dramatic confrontation at the Pinewood County Sheriff's Department, the small town of Millbrook, Mississippi bore little resemblance to its former self. FBI vehicles still lined the main street, with agents conducting interviews and collecting evidence from county offices beyond just the sheriff's department. Media vans remained stationed in front of the courthouse, where each day brought new revelations about the extensive corruption that had festered for years beneath the surface of local governance. Sheriff Dale Crandall and 6 deputies, including officers Wilson and Lawson, had been formally charged with multiple federal offenses ranging from civil rights violations to evidence tampering, false imprisonment, and conspiracy. The county jail where Marcus had been held now housed several of its former administrators, a irony not lost on local residents who gathered daily to watch the proceedings unfold. In Washington, D.C., Marcus Green sat before a congressional committee, his testimony broadcast live across the nation. Despite offers to postpone his appearance until he had fully recovered, Marcus had insisted on speaking while the nation's attention remained focused on the issues his experience had highlighted. "What happened to me in Pinewood County was not an anomaly," he stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded operating rooms and military hospitals for decades. "It was simply a visible example of what occurs daily to citizens without my connections or resources. The difference is that when it happened to me, 6 black Escalades showed up within hours. For most victims of such abuse, no help arrives at all." The committee members listened with uncharacteristic attentiveness as Marcus methodically outlined recommendations for police reform, drawing on both his personal experience and his lifetime of disciplined, evidence-based thinking. "Accountability cannot be optional or occasional," he concluded. "It must be systematic, transparent, and applied equally regardless of who is involved." While Marcus testified in Washington, changes were already taking shape in Pinewood County. Deputy James Thompson had been appointed interim sheriff by the county commissioner, with a mandate to rebuild the department from the ground up. His first official act was to implement body cameras for all officers and establish a civilian review board with genuine oversight authority. Deputy Sandra Collins was appointed training coordinator, tasked with developing a comprehensive program addressing implicit bias and proper procedure. Her curriculum prominently featured the dash camera footage from Marcus's arrest as a case study in how not to conduct law enforcement. "This isn't about shame or punishment," she explained to the remaining deputies and new recruits. "It's about learning from failure to build something better." At his son's home in Atlanta, Marcus spent his evenings reviewing the hundreds of letters and emails that poured in daily from around the country. Some came from fellow veterans expressing outrage at his treatment. Others came from medical colleagues offering support and assistance. Most powerful were the messages from ordinary citizens sharing their own experiences with law enforcement bias, stories that had previously gone untold because the victims believed no one would listen or care. Marcus responded to as many as his strength allowed, particularly those from young people questioning whether to continue pursuing careers in medicine or public service after witnessing such injustice. "The system needs good people more than ever," he wrote repeatedly. "Don't let the flaws in our institutions discourage you from working to improve them." The national conversation sparked by Marcus's case had expanded beyond police practices to examine broader patterns of systemic discrimination. News organizations that initially focused on the dramatic confrontation at the sheriff's department now produced in-depth investigations of similar departments across the country, revealing troubling patterns that had persisted for decades. In Congress, a comprehensive police reform bill was drafted and named the Dr. Marcus Green Justice in Policing Act, with provisions addressing qualified immunity, use of force standards, and federal oversight mechanisms for departments with patterns of civil rights violations. The legislation faced significant opposition, but its supporters were bolstered by polling showing unprecedented public support across demographic and political lines. former Sheriff Crandall, facing decades in federal prison, had begun cooperating with investigators, revealing connections between his department's practices and officials at the state level. His detailed testimony implicated 2 state judges, a senior official in the Highway Patrol, and 3 members of the governor's staff who had helped suppress previous complaints and investigations. The governor, initially dismissive of the Pinewood County situation, now faced a recall petition with signatures rapidly approaching the threshold required by state law. In a particularly significant development, Officers Wilson and Lawson had requested a meeting with civil rights leaders and community members as part of a restorative justice process. The session, held in the Millbrook Community Center, was tense and emotional as the former officers listened to citizens describe how the department's practices had affected their lives and communities. "I never saw it as a system," Wilson admitted, his former arrogance replaced by genuine remorse. "I just saw individual stops, individual arrests. I never stepped back to see the pattern we were creating or the harm we were causing." While this process unfolded in Pinewood County, Marcus was invited to the Pentagon for a special ceremony honoring his lifetime of service. The event had been planned before his arrest but took on new significance in its aftermath. Standing before colleagues and former patients, many of whom had traveled great distances to attend, Marcus received the Distinguished Public Service Medal, the highest honor the Department of Defense can bestow upon a civilian. Dr. Green's contributions to military medicine have saved thousands of lives, General Hayes stated in his presentation. His innovative techniques and selfless service in combat zones set a standard of excellence that continues to influence how we care for wounded warriors today. But perhaps his greatest service has been the example he sets of dignity, courage, and unwavering commitment to justice, even in the face of personal mistreatment. After the ceremony, Marcus was approached by a group of young black medical students who had been invited to attend. "Dr. Green," one asked, "after everything you've experienced, what advice would you give us as we enter the medical profession?" Marcus considered the question carefully. Medicine is ultimately about seeing the humanity in every patient, regardless of circumstances or background. That same principle applies to creating justice in our society. Never lose sight of the human beings affected by systems, policies, and practices. And never underestimate your power to change those systems when they fail to honor human dignity. Back in Mississippi, the investigation had expanded to neighboring counties, where similar patterns of misconduct had emerged. The FBI established a regional task force dedicated to examining law enforcement practices throughout the state, with plans to extend the effort nationwide. Agent Washington, who had led the initial investigation, was appointed to head the task force. "What we discovered in Pinewood County appears to be the tip of a much larger iceberg," she noted in a press conference. "We're committed to a thorough examination of these issues, wherever they lead." Marcus's medical colleagues had not remained silent throughout these developments. The American Medical Association issued a formal statement condemning his treatment and establishing a legal defense fund for medical professionals who experience similar civil rights violations. Medical schools across the country incorporated discussions of his case into their ethics curricula, examining the intersections of race, authority, and professional identity. As the week drew to a close, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at his son's home. Deputy Sandra Collins's father, Master Sergeant James Collins, Ret., the soldier whose leg he had saved in Desert Storm. The two men, now both in their 70s, embraced like old friends reunited after too long apart. "When Sandra called and told me what happened, who you were, I couldn't believe it," Collins said, shaking his head. "All these years, I've been telling people about the doctor who fought for me when everyone else had given up. I never thought I'd get the chance to thank you again." "No thanks necessary," Marcus replied. "I was just doing my job, the same as you were doing yours." They spent the afternoon sharing memories and photographs, filling in the decades since their paths had last crossed. Before leaving, Collins presented Marcus with a folded American flag in a display case. "My unit sent this when they heard the story. They wanted you to have it as a reminder that what you stand for still matters to a lot of people in this country. As Master Sergeant Collins departed, Marcus stood at the window watching him go, the flag now resting on a shelf nearby. The events of the past week had taken him from a cell in a rural sheriff's department to the halls of Congress and the Pentagon, but this quiet moment of connection felt more significant than any official recognition. It was a reminder of why his work had always mattered, not for accolades or advancement, but for the lives touched and the differences made, often in circumstances where hope seemed in short supply. His son found him still standing at the window, deep in thought. "Dad, are you okay? You should be resting." Marcus turned with a smile. "I'm fine, Michael. Just thinking about the strange paths that bring people together, and what we owe each other when they do." 6 months after his arrest in Pinewood County, Dr. Marcus Green stood at the podium in the newly renovated Millbrook Community Hospital auditorium, surveying the standing-room-only crowd before him. The invitation to deliver the inaugural lecture in the hospital's community education series had come from an unexpected source, Sheriff James Thompson, whose promotion from interim to permanent status had been confirmed by a special election the previous month. "Distinguished guests, medical colleagues, and community members," Marcus began, his voice strong and clear despite the trials of the past half-year. "I stand before you today not as a victim of injustice, though that is part of my story, but as a witness to the remarkable capacity for transformation that exists within our institutions and communities when we have the courage to acknowledge failures and commit to meaningful change." The audience included hospital staff, local officials, community members, and a contingent of military personnel who had traveled from bases across the region to attend. In the front row sat Deputy Sandra Collins beside her father, both beaming with pride at the changes they had helped bring about in their community. Marcus's lecture, titled "Healing Systems, Medicine, Justice, and Community Wellness," drew parallels between treating individual patients and addressing systemic problems in society. He moved easily between complex medical concepts and accessible examples, his decades of teaching experience evident in the way he engaged every person in the room regardless of their background. 200 miles away, in a federal courtroom in Jackson, former Sheriff Dale Crandall received his sentence, 18 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, corruption, and obstruction of justice. The judge, an African-American woman with 30 years on the bench, delivered a scathing assessment of Crandall's actions and their impact on the community he had sworn to protect. "The authority entrusted to law enforcement is a sacred covenant with the public," she stated. "Your systematic abuse of that authority for personal gain and the enforcement of your own prejudices represents the most fundamental betrayal of your oath." The corruption investigation had expanded well beyond Pinewood County, resulting in indictments against 27 officials across Mississippi, including judges, prosecutors, and state-level administrators who had enabled and profited from discriminatory practices. The governor, facing recall and federal scrutiny, had announced he would not seek re-election, effectively ending his political career. After his lecture, Marcus reunited with Deputy Sandra Collins, who had undergone her own transformation in the months since their first meeting. Now serving as the department's community relations director alongside her training responsibilities, she had become the public face of the reformed sheriff's department. "Dr. Green, I can't thank you enough for coming back," she said. "It means everything to this community to see you here on different terms." Marcus smiled warmly. "Sandra, your work is what truly matters. The changes you and Sheriff Thompson have implemented will long outlast any lecture I could give." She led him on a tour of the transformed sheriff's department, now housed in a renovated building with glass walls symbolizing the new commitment to transparency. Inside, the department bore little resemblance to the place where Marcus had been detained. A diverse staff of deputies moved with purpose through an environment designed around community service rather than intimidation. Training rooms featured curriculum developed with input from civil rights organizations and community members. The holding cells had been completely redesigned with medical access as a priority. Most striking was the wall of the main lobby, which now displayed the department's new mission statement: "To protect with integrity, serve with respect, and ensure justice for all." Below it hung a plaque commemorating the events that had catalyzed the department's transformation, including a quote from Marcus about the possibility of growth through acknowledging failure. Sheriff Thompson joined them, extending his hand to Marcus with genuine respect. "Dr. Green, every person wearing a badge in this department has studied your case and the failures it represented. I want you to know we're committed to ensuring nothing like that ever happens again, not just here but in departments across the country that have followed our reforms." The conversation was interrupted by a young black boy, about 10 years old, who approached Marcus shyly. "Excuse me, sir. Are you really the doctor from the news? The one who operated on soldiers?" Marcus knelt to the child's level, military discipline still evident in his posture despite his age. "I am. My name is Marcus." "What's yours?" "DeAndre," the boy replied. "My teacher showed us a video about you. I told my mom I want to be a doctor just like you when I grow up." Marcus felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced when mentoring young doctors throughout his career. "That's a wonderful goal, DeAndre. It takes a lot of hard work and study, but I have no doubt you can do it." The boy's mother approached, apologizing for the interruption, but Marcus waved away her concerns. "No apology necessary. Future doctors take priority in my schedule, always." That afternoon, Marcus visited 3 schools in the county, speaking to students about careers in medicine and the importance of perseverance in the face of obstacles. In each classroom, he was struck by the diversity of the students and the engagement of their teachers, signs of progress in a community working to overcome decades of division. At the final school, he was presented with a book of letters from students thanking him for his courage and sharing their own dreams for the future. Meanwhile, the state legislature was voting on a comprehensive police reform bill that incorporated many of the recommendations Marcus had made during his congressional testimony. The Green Standards, as they had come to be known, established clear guidelines for traffic stops, use of force, and medical care for detainees, with meaningful penalties for departments that failed to comply. Similar legislation was under consideration in 26 other states, with several having already enacted their own versions. Back in Millbrook, the day concluded with a community reconciliation dinner held in the high school gymnasium. Tables were arranged to ensure diverse seating, bringing together law enforcement, community members, and local officials in conversation facilitated by trained mediators. Marcus sat at a table with Sheriff Thompson, Sandra and her father, 2 local ministers, and several residents who had previously filed complaints against the department. The conversations were sometimes difficult but consistently respectful, focusing on both acknowledging past harms and building pathways to a more just future. After dinner, Marcus was invited to address the gathering. As he approached the podium, he noticed the gymnasium wall now featured a mural depicting the town's history, including an unflinching representation of its difficulties alongside images of healing and progress. "6 months ago, I drove through Pinewood County as a stranger passing through," he began. "Today, I return as someone connected to this community by an experience none of us would have chosen, but which has created the opportunity for genuine transformation." He surveyed the room, making eye contact with people of all ages and backgrounds. "In my decades as a surgeon, I learned that healing is rarely quick or easy. It requires honest diagnosis, sometimes painful intervention, and consistent attention during recovery. Communities heal in much the same way, through truthful acknowledgement of wounds, active work to repair damage, and ongoing commitment to health." Marcus continued. "The symbolic key to the city that I received today represents more than a ceremonial honor. It represents a commitment to remaining connected to this community and its journey. I accept it with gratitude and with a promise to return regularly to support the important work you are all doing." As he concluded his remarks, the audience rose in a standing ovation that acknowledged not just Marcus's personal journey but the collective work of everyone who had contributed to the changes unfolding in their community. After the event, Marcus stood in the parking lot with General Hayes, who had flown in specifically for the occasion. "Remarkable transformation," Hayes observed, looking back at the school where people were still engaged in animated conversation. "6 months ago, I was ready to tear this place apart to get you out. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes systems need to be dismantled before they can be rebuilt properly. But the real work happens in what comes after, the patient, persistent effort to create something better. The following morning, Marcus prepared to leave Pinewood County, this time under very different circumstances than his first departure. His car was serviced and waiting, courtesy of a local mechanic who had refused payment, saying simply, "It's an honor, Dr. Green." Before driving away, Marcus took a detour, retracing the route where he had been pulled over 6 months earlier. The road looked the same curves, the same pine trees lining the shoulders, but everything else had changed. Where Officer Wilson had once stood with contempt and prejudice, community-oriented deputies now patrolled with body cameras and clearly established protocols. Where a corrupt system had once operated with impunity, accountability measures now ensured transparency and oversight. Marcus pulled into a roadside rest area and stepped out of his car, taking a moment to appreciate the significance of the journey, not just his personal experience, but the longer arc of progress that had shaped his life and the country he had served. As a young man entering medical school in an era when black doctors were still rarities, he could not have imagined the career that awaited him or the impact his work would have. Now, in the final chapter of his life, he found himself at the center of changes that might benefit generations to come. A patrol car pulled into the rest area, and Sheriff Thompson stepped out with a friendly wave. "Thought I might find you here before you left," he said, approaching with an outstretched hand. "Wanted to thank you once more and let you know we'll be continuing the work." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "I know you will, Sheriff. And I'll be watching with great interest, not as a critic, but as an ally." They parted with mutual respect, two men from different generations and backgrounds united by a commitment to principles larger than themselves. As Marcus drove away from Pinewood County, he reflected on the nature of progress, how it rarely moves in straight lines, how it requires vigilance and courage, and how even painful experiences can become catalysts for necessary change. The road ahead stretched before him, leading back to his family and the next chapter of his life's work, mentoring young doctors and officers, speaking truth to power, and continuing to embody the dignity that had carried him through 72 years of both triumph and adversity. He adjusted his rearview mirror, briefly glimpsing the road behind him before focusing on what lay ahead. There was still much to do, many systems still in need of healing, but for now, the immediate journey was complete. Pinewood County would never forget Dr. Marcus Green, and he would never forget the community that had transformed a moment of injustice into an opportunity for lasting change. What moments in this story resonated most with you? Comment below with the part that you found most powerful, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you believe stories of justice and transformation deserve to be heard. Thank you for joining me on this journey through a powerful example of how one person's dignity can inspire systemic change, and how accountability can lead to healing. Until next time, remember that progress isn't always easy, but it's always worth fighting for. Dr. Marcus Green's journey reveals profound truths about justice and systemic change. First, dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. Despite degradation and danger, Marcus maintained the same composure that guided him through battlefields and operating rooms. Second, accountability requires visibility. Without Deputy Thompson's courage in preserving evidence and Colonel Daniels' determination to respond, Marcus's experience would have remained invisible like countless others. Third, true justice extends beyond individual vindication to address root causes. Marcus insisted on transforming systems, not merely punishing individuals. Fourth, institutions only change when enough insiders recognize injustice and outsiders demand accountability. The combination of Thompson and Collins working from within while federal authorities applied pressure from without created the necessary conditions for reform. Fifth, lasting change requires sustained commitment. The transformation of Pinewood County wasn't achieved through a single dramatic confrontation but through the patient work that followed: new training protocols, civilian oversight, community reconciliation. Finally, our collective progress depends on addressing not just dramatic instances of injustice but the everyday abuses that never make headlines. Dr. Green's story reminds us that dignity, courage, and persistence remain our most powerful tools for building a more just society. What moments in this story touched you most deeply? Was it Marcus's unwavering dignity despite mistreatment, Deputy Thompson's courage to stand against corruption from within, or the community's determination to transform tragedy into lasting change? Comment below with the scene that resonated most with you and why. If you believe stories of courage and accountability deserve wider attention, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Every like helps this story reach those who might recognize their own experiences in Marcus's journey or find inspiration for their own work toward justice. Thank you for bearing witness to this powerful story about how dignity persists even in the darkest moments, and how systems can be transformed when enough people commit to doing what's right. Remember, in the words of Dr. Green, progress is never complete, never perfect, but always worth fighting for.